Hi, everyone. Tonight, I really do have both Fluffy and Chocolate here, but I got special food to bring them in. And Chocolate immediately came into my arms, but Fluffy turned it into a game, so he'll be going in and out of the office. But they are my pals who purr with love, and they make me laugh every day. As I know a lot of you describe what you have interactions with your animals that just can make you fall on the floor laughing, and that is one of the best things we can do in life. Now, switching from the joy that we can get from animals to something sad, that the pause in the Johnson & Johnson vaccinations this week, after 6 women between 18 and 48 developed severe blood clotting, comes at a really bad time. The mutant variants from Brazil and South Africa are spreading, and the very contagious and more dangerous variant B117, first identified in the United Kingdom, appears now to infect and spread in children much more easily than the original COVID-19 coronavirus. Dr. Michael Osterholm, director of the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy at the University of Minnesota, told NBC's Meet the Press on April 4th, quote, "Please understand, this B117 variant is a brand new ballgame. It infects kids very readily. Unlike the previous strains of the virus, we did not see children under the 8th grade get infected often, but anywhere you look now, you see that kids are playing a huge role in the transmission of B117. The infection is changing its contours in terms of who's being stricken by it right now. Michigan, Minnesota, Texas, Oregon, and New York City are fighting COVID surges. The New York Times reported yesterday on April 13th, 2021, there were 77,312 new cases reported in the United States and 987 new deaths. Dr. Osterholm says all the vaccines still help against B117, but he is afraid, quote, "We're not going to have nearly enough vaccine doses in the next 6 to 8 weeks to get through this surge. And if you aren't vaccinated, you have to behave as though you are highly vulnerable to this virus," close quote. Now, far away from COVID, on Mars is the Ingenuity helicopter in the Jezero crater. It was supposed to do its first test flight today, but NASA has delayed one more time because during a high-speed spin test of the rotors on Friday, when the helicopter tried to switch from pre-flight mode to flight mode, a watchdog timer detected a problem and stopped the operation. NASA has to reboot Ingenuity and try again next week. And while Earth scientists keep putting Earth-manufactured UFOs in the Martian sky and landscape, back on Earth, there is more Pentagon news about unidentified aerial vehicles in Earth skies recorded by American military with night vision and FLIR infrared technologies, and sometimes even a pilot's own cell phone. First, here is one clear frame of a bright green triangle in a short night vision video posted by Jeremy Corbell, producer of Extraordinary Beliefs website. The video lasts only 18 seconds and is entitled, quote, "The U.S. Navy photographed and filmed pyramid-shaped UFOs and advanced transmedium vehicles. Here is that footage," close quote. Before the next frame, I just want you to know that the Pentagon's definition of transmedium vehicles includes underwater craft. And below the black video frame, it has this sentence from Susan Goff, senior strategist and Pentagon spokesperson, quote, I can confirm that the reference photos and videos were taken by Navy personnel. The UAPTF, that is a government acronym for the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, now revamped in the Defense Department. The UAPTF has included these incidents in their ongoing examinations, she is confirming. Jeremy Corbell, editor of ExtraordinaryBeliefs.com, adds that the video was filmed by the U.S. Navy in July of 2019 near San Diego, California, involving the USS Russell Strike Group 9 in a military warning area. Now, let's look at this video that we looped 5 times. Another website, The Debrief, reported it reached out to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs and DoD's Executive Services Office and formally requested an interview with someone authorized to speak on UAP briefings with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Senior strategist and Pentagon spokesperson Susan Goff responded, quote, "To maintain operations security, which includes not disseminating information publicly that may be useful to our adversaries, DoD does not discuss publicly the details of either the observations or the examination of reported incursions into our training ranges or designated airspace, including those incursions initially designated as UAP, which is unidentified aerial phenomena, and that includes not discussing the UAPTF publicly also," close quote. But the debrief also reported, quote, "Multiple sources confirmed that the UAPTF, the DoD's Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, had issued 2 classified intelligence position reports which one individual described as, quote, shocking, close quote. Other debrief inquiries have provoked an additional source via the CIA's IntelLink system to confirm, quote, the potential for UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, to be alien or non-human technology, and that this was of legitimate consideration. Here is another UAP photo included in the debrief report with this description, quote, "The photograph, which is said to have also been taken from inside the cockpit of a military fighter jet, depicted an apparent aerospace vehicle described as a large equilateral triangle with rounded or blunted edges and large, perfectly spherical white lights in each corner. Officials who had seen it said the image was captured in 2019 by an FA-18 fighter pilot on his cell phone. 2 officials that received the report said the photo was taken after the triangular craft emerged from the ocean and began to ascend straight upwards at a 90-degree angle. It was indicated that this event occurred off the eastern coast of the United States. Several other sources confirmed the photo's existence. However, they declined to provide any further specifics of this incident. Officials who read the recent report say it primarily focused on, quote, unidentified submersible phenomena or unidentified transmedium vehicles capable of operating both underwater and in the air. And I've told you all before, the DIA analyst in Washington, D.C., who met with me in December of 1999, told me that our government had proof that 3 competing extraterrestrial civilizations have been using this planet Earth as a laboratory for at least 270 million years, and our government has proof of that. And that the 3 different competing civilizations choose different parts of Earth to inhabit. The gray types like to be inside mountains, such as the Himalayas or Himalayas. The tall blondes like cooler temperatures and allegedly have very large bases inside our planet beneath the basins of the oceans and seas and lakes. The reptilians are said to like hotter temperatures and have always based underground and inside hills in the Mesopotamian deserts of the Middle East. Whoever, whatever, other intelligences are actually in control of UFO, UAP advanced technologies. Remember last week on April 7th, I shared with you the long list of extraterrestrial biological entity technologies retrieved from late 1940s UFO crashes that U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso described in his very important 1997 book, The Day After Roswell. After I said goodnight to you all last week, I started looking for my original July 7th, 1997 interview that I had done with Colonel Corso at the 50th Roswell anniversary of the July 1947 UFO crashes. We did our interview for the weekly radio broadcast then, entitled Dreamland, hosted by Art Bell, where I reported regularly Earth Mysteries News. And after last week's broadcast, I found the original July 7th, 1997 tapes. I've edited excerpts to share with you tonight that begin with Art Bell's original introduction from his Pahrump, Nevada radio studio to me and Colonel Corso on one hotel phone in Roswell.
Books about Roswell and about extraterrestrials, I would venture a guess that none has stirred the pot more heavily than the book we're going to talk about tonight and the man who wrote it, actually men who wrote it. Colonel Philip J. Corso, retired with William J. Burns, has authored The Day After Roswell. And in fact, it is the day after Roswell when things really began to happen. Here in Roswell, to begin it all, is Linda Moulton Howe. Linda, welcome.
Hi. You know, it was April 1983. I was sitting in that office at Kirtland Air Force Base with Air Force Office of Special Investigations Agent Richard C. Doty, who was handing me a paper. He said that I could read. I could not take notes, and he made me sit in a chair in the middle of a room that I later learned was because they videotaped and audiotaped my reactions to what I was reading.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And the top of that paper said, briefing paper for the President of the United States of America on the subject of identified aerial vehicles. And when I turned to the next page in the first paragraph, it listed retrievals of extraterrestrial craft and bodies, both dead and alive, from locations in the southwestern United States and the northern nation of Mexico. And it listed a series of cities and areas, including at least two in the Roswell area in 47 and 49, one as early as 1946, predating all of the historic discussion about 1947. Talked about the retrieval of a craft from northern Mexico south of Laredo, Texas, over the border. Talked about the retrieval of a crash in Kingman, Arizona, and Magdalena, near the plains of St. Augustine. The paper went into our government having these craft and these beings that they didn't understand what they were or where they came from, had set in motion military, medical, and scientific people to study and keep all of this information from the public and the media while they ascertained whether there was a national security threat. Inside of our United States government, that one of the things that had also helped keep this whole story covered up for nearly half a century was internal conflict between the intelligence agencies in the United States and military branches, that inside of the structures of our government, we had a kind of internecine war going on between various bureaus.
Well, that's not hard to imagine because the military wars between the various branches of its own.
That's right. And in 1947, for the very first time, the United States separated Army, Air Force into two separate branches, which added to the confusion in 1947. Well, tonight, I am sitting with a book on my lap that says The truth exposed after 50 years, former Pentagon official reveals the United States government's shocking UFO cover-up the day after Roswell by Colonel Philip J. Corso, retired, with William J. Burns, forward by Senator Strom Thurmond. I have read this book from cover to cover. This book is one of the most important voices that has emerged in the last 50 years from a man who was there in 1960 to 63 in the Pentagon, working with Lieutenant General Arthur Trudeau on one of the most provocative challenges, how to get not understood artifacts retrieved from these disks into the industrial complex of the United States so that it could be used by military and industry without being swallowed up into the black hole of intelligence that would never let it out. And now I'm going to introduce Colonel Philip J. Corso, retired, the man with a remarkable first-hand experience with this information. And we are working in Roswell where we have one phone, and I'm going to have Colonel Corso talk to us about his first-hand experience at Fort Riley, Kansas, back in 1947 when he himself saw what is called an extraterrestrial biological entity. This is Colonel Corso.
Colonel, welcome to the program.
Yes, thank you.
You saw an extraterrestrial at Fort Riley, Kansas?
Yes. I came back from Italy, and then I asked for assignment, and they gave me an assignment in Fort Riley. It was garrison duty. One particular night, I was the post duty officer. That night, I was in charge of almost all security, the guards, and the post, all night long. I wore a sidearm, and I wore a band on my arm identifying me as a post duty officer. And one of my primary duties was to inspect the guard to make sure they were all on duty, in the right places, and doing their job. I was told there was a sensitive area in one of the veterinarian areas. So about 3 in the morning, I was doing my rounds of the guards, and I stopped in this particular guard. That's a sergeant that I knew very well. I used to bowl with him at the field house. And I told him, "Sergeant, everything quiet?" He said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You want to see something, Colonel?" So I walked in the back room with him, and I lifted the end of the tarp up. And here was this body floating in some sort of liquid. Strange thing, it was a small body. I thought it was a child. And I looked at the head and the arms, and I saw it wasn't a child. It was a gray color. And then I put the tarp back down. Now, all this lasted, I'd say, 15 seconds or so. The head was large. No ears, no nose, no mouth, slits only. The eyes were large, slanted, large compared to our eyes. The arms were sort of spindly, and the legs were sort of spindly. As we were walking out, and I told him, "Sergeant, where did it come from?" And he said, "Well, I talked to the drivers. There was 2 men in each truck, 2 soldiers, 5 trucks total." And he said that it came from Fort Riley, they said, an Army Air Force base in New Mexico, 1947. And they're hidden for Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. 2 weeks after it happened. And here's Linda back.
All right.
Art?
Yes.
That was 1947.
Right.
And I'm just going to give some background that Colonel Philip Corso was a key Army intelligence officer who served on General MacArthur's staff in Korea, and later on served on President Dwight D. Eisenhower's National Security Council as a lieutenant colonel. During his 21-year military career, he was honored with 19 medals, decorations, and ribbons for meritorious service. He retired from the Army in 1963 after 3 extraordinary years from 1960 to 1963, working directly with Lieutenant General Arthur Trudeau in the Pentagon concerning this whole issue now from 47 to 1960. Colonel Corso had had that one experience of seeing this extraterrestrial biological entity at Fort Riley on its way to Wright-Patterson. In the mid-'80s, when I first heard that phrase, Earth's Secret War, and what in the world was it about, I always thought that it was something of an inside unit in our government versus whatever the non-human intelligence was. What I'm beginning to understand in my conversations with Colonel Corso is that it was a very much more complex and dicey situation in which the military was perceiving that they were having to operate as if Not only did they not understand a non-human intelligence that Colonel Corso describes in his own book, they knew that there were animal mutilations and human abductions in the late 1950s that they felt that they had to be concerned about, but they were also concerned about their Cold War enemies and this intense suspicion of spies in the Central Intelligence Agency and other agencies. And this sets the stage for the period of 1960 to 63. And I'm going to read briefly from the book. In 1961, Colonel Corso, then a lieutenant colonel, was given command of one of the Pentagon's highly classified weapons development budgets and was made privy to the United States government's greatest secret, the dismantling and appropriation of the Roswell extraterrestrial spacecraft by the United States Army. Identifying all those involved, Colonel Corso reveals how a deep cover council officially discounted all UFO reports to the American public and cleared the path for his research and development team at the Pentagon to analyze and integrate the Roswell artifacts into the military arsenal and the private business sector. The extent of the operation is startling. With unprecedented detail, Colonel Corso divulges how he spearheaded the Army's reverse engineering project, seeded alien technology at American companies such as IBM, Hughes Aircraft, Bell Labs, and Dow Corning without their knowledge. He describes the devices found aboard the Roswell craft and how they were the precursors for today's integrated circuit chips, fiber optics, lasers, and super tenacity fibers. He also discusses the role alien technology played in shaping geopolitical policy and events, how it helped the United States surpass the Russians in space, spurred elaborate Army initiatives such as SDI, which is the Star Wars program, Project Horizon, which we will talk about later, had to do with putting a base on the moon, Project HARP, that we have done shows on in the past, and ultimately brought about the end of the Cold War, unquote. I'm quoting from the day after Roswell.
And I was appointed in the Foreign Technology Division. General Trudeau called me and said, I'm delivering a file cabinet to you. He said, you go through it, and you start working up a plan of action and recommendations to me. In one particular case, I had the integrated circuit chips. They're about like a quarter. I told General Trudeau, what's going to happen in the future if this chip integrates with the human brain? He said, yes, Phil, that's a great danger, but I doubt if it'll happen in our lifetime. Now, in addition to that, when I started to go through the file, I found a piece of metal about the size of a postcard and paper thin. The atoms were aligned in it, and this came from Livermore Lab. And General Trudeau called me in, and he said, I'm making you head of a team. You will get Army engineers and German scientists. And I did assign two to my team. So the job was to go around industry and see who was working on such items. One day, when we went to one of these industries, they had a long tunnel-like thing. And at the end of the day, after supper, I motioned to one of the German scientists, Hans, take a walk with me. Well, what do you think? He said, Colonel, if I believe everything I've heard today, I have to unlearn everything I've ever learned. Hans, you might have to. General Trudeau made the statement, this could be bigger than Los Alamos, because this piece of metal can make spaceships light as a feather.
This piece of metal came from where? The crash at Roswell, or did you not know?
No, I knew it came from Roswell. Then, integrated circuit, size of a chip, Trudeau gave me instructions. Find out who is working on similar, like a transistor. He said, any scientists are working on it, write me a plan of action on how we're going to do all this. That we would find scientists and people who are working in that area, and we would infuse in there normal research and development proposals. Not the item itself, but proposals describing it. These are supposed to be normal think tank operations. Here's exactly what we did. We found people working in that area. We infused the technology through projects, and we funded it. We funded the project. Not black budget, appropriated by Congress. Then one day, I pulled out of the file a bunch of wires. I thought they were wires, and they were emitting colors. I had no idea what it was. Finally, we got people working, and I think one of the ones was Bell Laboratory, cyber optics. I found a file labeled Project Rainbow. Rainbow was John von Neumann's project, and this was amazing. He was starting to work on artificial intelligence, artificial life. The supercomputer had not come in existence, but they were working on it. General Trudeau told me one day, getting back to the integrated circuit, he said, the transistor, the way it is today, and the integrated circuit took us 5 years to develop. It should have taken 250 years. Those were his exact words to me.
What General Arthur Trudeau is saying to Colonel Corso is that the UFO transistors and integrated circuits retrieved from New Mexico crashes in the late 1940s enabled Earth scientists to back engineer for military application and eventually commercial application in only 5 years. And that happened because the intelligences behind the technologies were off-planet and at least 250 years beyond human minds. There was also supposed to be a meeting on March 6 to 8, 1981, between newly inaugurated President Ronald Reagan and debriefers from the CIA, NSA, DIA, and other intelligence agencies. The analysts told President Reagan there are friendly and hostile extraterrestrial civilizations within a few light years of Earth. The hostiles are supposed to be insect beings on the third planet that orbits the star Epsilon Eridani, only 10.5 light years from Earth, that is orange colored in the lower left of this illustration. That star is very similar to our own sun. That is depicted as a yellow circle at the center of the star map, our sun. Epsilon Eridani is depicted orange because it's a little cooler than our sun, but quite similar. The intelligence briefers told President Reagan that scientists learned Epsilon Eridani craft used matter and antimatter propulsion, and that those insect beings referred to as tronoloids are at least 1,000 years more advanced than we are. 1,000 years. Some of the metals and materials collected from one of their downed craft are not even known to Earth scientists. Surrounding all of this is the question that UFO investigator and author John Keel asked in his brilliant 1975 book, The Eighth Tower. Is there one single intelligent force behind all UFO phenomena? And I, Linda, asked today, is it the same intelligent force described in ancient texts as the thought that dwells in the light? Confusion about beings of light versus dark, shadowy entities. That has puzzled me since September of 1979, when I began my first investigations of bloodless, trackless animal mutilations in Colorado and the surrounding region that led to a broadcast of my 90-minute TV special, A Strange Harvest, on Denver's CBS station in May of 1980. Ever since, I have tried to get to the bottom of the animal mutilation mystery, the human abduction syndrome, crop formations, Sasquatch, beams, fairy lights, and all the other Earth mysteries that have been reported for centuries. But what I still don't understand clearly are agendas. And I do not understand why the power of light does not automatically overcome the entropy of darkness. And we're in a yin and yang universe. Ian, I'm very interested in people's comments and questions.
Okay, Linda. Well, that was a fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
And I'm glad that you managed to find that interview from the archives.
I am too. Yeah. It was wonderful to hear Colonel Corso again and Art and think back at that 50th anniversary. then we all really thought that somehow the whole huge truth that we're not alone in this universe, and that the universe is teeming with consciousness, and that there have been other intelligences on this planet for centuries, millennia, millions. We all really thought that it was going to open up much earlier. If it does now in 2021, it will be inevitable as part of the what seems to be, to me, a revolution in all levels on this planet now. This is maybe the best time to open up everything.
Yeah, it was great to hear Art's voice again.
Yes.
Rest in peace, Art. He was certainly a groundbreaker.
And next week, I plan to do a part 2.
That's good news. We want to hear more. And I think that's the feeling in the chat as well from people, that they're enjoying this breakdown from Colonel Corso's information. First of all, Linda, I want to deal with the super chats, and thank you again, everyone, for your generosity. Here's the list for today. No prizes for guessing the first one on the list. Linda, any guesses?
Moonbird!
Yeah, Moonbird was the first one to make a super chat going today.
Thank you, Moonbird.
And here we go for the rest of them. And there's some familiar ones again here. Jeffrey Rizzo, Rebecca Cole, Gina McHugh, Dave Goodridge, Thought on Fire 222, Mary Kelly, Carl Balsamer, Christy Marr, Vicky Martinez, Mink Bach, Kim Spencer, Caroline Boyce, Nathan Tyson, Valerian the Mac 3, and Ben Fleming, and Crystal Legnet. Just got you in there. Sorry if I've missed anyone else out, but thank you, everyone.
Yes,
okay, Linda.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Now, questions.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, one of the things, it's more of a comment more than anything.
Okay.
It's can you just allude more on the initial contact where I think it was President Eisenhower actually introduced Colonel Corso to General Trudeau, and I think it was because Trudeau was in a certain position that he was able to be trusted.
Well, yes, and I'll tell you, because Colonel Corso and I spent an entire day in Roswell during the festivities talking. He had documents with him. I had my book, which it was so funny when we were introduced. He had requested from a publicist, because of the release of his new book, The Day After Roswell, and through the publicist, he had asked them to get in touch with me and said, I want to talk with Linda Moulton Howe at the conference in Roswell. And I was delighted, and that came together for this interview, but separately, Colonel Corso wanted to talk to me privately about many things having to do with his own investigations of animal mutilations, abductions. So we started out with a common interest, and so we had really substantive discussions. And it was during all of that, sort of the content discussion, that he said that his work in 61 to 63 in the Pentagon with General Arthur Trudeau grew out of the fact that those two men had met in, I believe it was Rome, during World War II. And they had, even though they were in different ranks, they had become friends. And he said a lot of people don't realize that General Trudeau was a PhD, and that General Eisenhower looked up to General Trudeau. And that is the way Colonel Corso said it, that General Eisenhower trusted General Trudeau as much or more than anyone that he knew. And this was coming to me through Colonel Corso explaining that it was out of the evolution of the war, and Dwight D. Eisenhower became president, and he knew and trusted General Trudeau, and General Trudeau knew and trusted Philip Corso. And he told me another very interesting insight. He said that in private conversations, that General Trudeau had told him that President Eisenhower had was warning General Trudeau, the CIA is infiltrated, and that Eisenhower felt that he had to reach out to people that he had known in the war if he could, and he loved the Army. That's where he served, and that he was partial to, for a while, for the Army to be his first people around him. And in that context, Colonel Corso said, it sounds maybe strange now, and that was when we were talking in 1997, because we're in the Pentagon, and it's General Arthur Trudeau's office. And he said, but he really did call me in and say, Phil, I want to show you some things in these file drawers. And he said, I had no idea what General Trudeau was going to show me in these metal file drawers. And he said, literally, the general got up, went over, opened up a file drawer, said, come here. Picked out something that was in the drawer, put it in Colonel Corso's hand, said, see this? What does it look like to you? And Phil Corso said, I don't know. It's like maybe a bunch of wires. And the general said, no, the ranchers thought it was horsehair. We found it in some of the crashes, and we know that we can get light out of it. Well, that was the very first time that Colonel Corso, in a very casual conversation over a file drawer in the Pentagon, was introduced to what the world would come to know as fiber optics. And that the way Colonel Corso described it back on that 50th anniversary is that the general had gotten the authority, I guess, that these technologies that might have gone to Wright-Patterson, that might have gone to Kirtland, that might have gone to Los Alamos, maybe did, but that a lot of them, including the integrated circuits and the transistors and other things, ended up in literal metal file drawers in the office of General Arthur Trudeau in the Pentagon. And it was from those file drawers that they worked. And eventually, he said that General Trudeau wanted Colonel Corso to have one of the file cabinets with very specific pieces in them in Colonel Corso's office, so he could act more independently. And that is how the back engineering of at least the wedge-shaped, they were not round, they were wedge-shaped craft that came down in at least 3 locations in the Roswell region and in Magdalena, out going west, quite a ways actually from Roswell. Those were the areas that he specifically specified that they knew where the pieces had come from. In other cases, he didn't know. So I find, like so much in human life, in that how things begin and what is really happening sometimes is so humbly simple.
Yes, it is, and the fact that alien technology was in a filing cabinet in General Trudeau's office is truly incredible.
Yeah.
But it's good to hear the first-hand accounts, especially those from Colonel Corso.
So what do we got up next?
Okay, here's another question. Linda, what subject matter within Corso's book do you think is currently most important?
That is a very good question. And honestly, this is truly an honest answer. I really do, I hope all of you would read the book from first word to last word and go through the index and read the entire moon base document that was included at the back, Horizon. And the reason I say that is that I could say that what he reports about animal mutilations is so true. It was so stunning, And when the book first came out, a lot of people, when he was on NBC and he mentioned that our government knew that the advanced intelligences in the craft could travel in different times, in different dimensions, that they were concluding this, and the transdimensionals could include water and air and maybe the dimension next door. And the thing about it is that Colonel Corso goes into so many firsthand important pieces, and he's calling a spade a spade. Extraterrestrials are mutilating animals on this planet. They are doing it bloodlessly, and he reports exactly the same thing that I found with the veterinarians that I work with, that high heat had cooked the collagen and the hemoglobin, and that this high heat at these excisions that darkened the edge, he has it all in there. And this was one of the subjects that he most wanted to talk to me about when he shook my hand and said, "Linda Moulton Howe, I want to know how you got so much confidential information in your books." And he did it with a twinkle in his eye. As we sat and compared notes, it is so clear that there was no confusion on the part of the people in the Pentagon or the ones that he was working with, that extraterrestrial biological entities were the perpetrators. And then you get to the question of who, what, and why. And the agenda discussions become more difficult and are harder, I guess, to prove. But he knew a great deal. God rest him wherever he is. He was a wonderful person. What else?
Several people are reading the book already, they're reporting, and it's worth noting that the book runs to some 400 pages, so it is an actual really packed edition. So I would recommend that to anyone.
It is a very, very, I said it last week, I said it in the video, I read it cover to cover, and I still consider it one of the single most important. When I say a voice, I think of books as kind of a voice, even if there's lots of voices, but a book to me has a voice. And I think of Anatomy of a Phenomena by Jacques Vallée was an extremely important voice when it emerged. And that is the voice of that whole book is really important to absorb in total.
Did Colonel Corso ever mention what he thought had happened to James Forrestal, First Secretary of Defense?
We did talk about it. Yes, we did. I told him that I had met in 1986. We were meeting in July of 1997, so about a decade before, that a mathematician who had attended a conference in Connecticut had asked me if I would like to meet Larry Warren from Bentwaters. And Larry Warren was a friend of the mathematician's wife and family. And we were all, the three of us, sat with me recording, Ben Jameson recording, Larry Warren. And after Larry Warren went off on whatever work he was doing, and Ben Jameson and I went to have dinner. And we had spent this whole day going through UFOs and ETs and all of these things with Larry Warren. So now we're having dinner, and he told me that in their family there was a link to the Forrestal family. And without focusing on any detailed persons, I just want to say that that night he told me that this first Secretary of State in the United States, James Forrestal, who was hospitalized, had told in a whisper to a couple of the blood family members that some kind of entity was coming into his Bethesda Hospital room and communicating, but not through sound. Today, that is a common description for people in the human abduction syndrome. The mathematician said that's when the family thought that something was very, very wrong. And the mathematician raised the question, they may have talked on the phone with each other, and that the whole family, all the phones may have been tapped, and that sort of discussion, which would have stayed in the family, may have set off some sort of an alarm bell by people in a government that were desperate to contain what they were beginning to realize was advanced intelligences with advanced craft. Were they from outer space, literally, or were they all based on this planet? And nobody clamped down. Nobody was going to talk about entities and abductions and rooms and on and on. Now, I share that because it's so many, many, many years later. And it made me stop and think that what we're dealing with a phenomena that can move timelines, move dimensions, can walk, as they say, walk through a door from one end of the universe to another. They're that advanced. That what would they have been wanting to communicate to the person who was in charge of defense in a new office in the United States coming out of World War II? So the whole big story of whatever happened in and around James Forrestal, why he ended up in Bethesda, and what happened to him going out the windows, other people have reported. I don't know any proof of this, but I have been told that some people have reported that there were examinations of the windows in the Bethesda hospital, and that the pressure point of the hands was that force, like somebody held up hands to the window and then did something to break the window and make him fall. At least that has been talked about too. And everybody, of course, doesn't want to think that the Secretary of Defense, the first one, would have been murdered to keep, quote unquote, the UFO ET phenomena from reaching the public and the media through that first Secretary of Defense, who none of us know what was happening to him. Why did he really end up in that hospital, and what really did happen? So it is, I think it's always going to be one of those tragic mysteries of history. So, all right, Ian, another one.
Okay. Well, another comment is someone in the chat was just saying that their father worked for the phone company, and when they started using fiber optics, he was absolutely blown away. He said it was beyond anything he ever saw.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, and for those of you reading Colonel Corso's book, when you finish the whole thing and you realize how much the insiders in the Pentagon and the Defense Department and CIA, how much they actually knew. And that, remember, Ian, you probably remember this, it is a very famous news press conference in Washington, D.C. after one of the UFO flaps. It might have been the one in '52 when the UFOs flew over the Capitol for several nights. And General Sanford, I remember the name, he called together the press, and he had a hubcap from a car wheel. And he said, "I'm going to show you a UFO." And he threw the car hubcap up, and the cameramen were scrambling to photograph the hubcap that General Sanford was saying, "Here are your UFOs." And so they were trying to use sarcasm. They were trying to use intimidation. They were trying to use all kinds of psychological intimidation on people to keep the human family from talking about what was clearly a huge presence during World War II and after, and to this day, but clearly it's gone in intense cycles. For people who have studied some of the UFO history outside of the 40s, when you get into the 50s, some of the most dramatic described interactions with, say, pilots and UFOs happened in the 50s, and Len Stringfield wrote about Situation Red, and he told me, because of his U.S. Air Force career, that he knew that there was a policy that any pilot who had an interchange with a UFO and was killed, the family would never be told. And he said, we lost so many pilots trying to carry out orders to chase and we bring down some of the technology because the government so badly wanted to examine it. And in a way, in some of this, I can put myself in the shoes of the people who are hired, elected, paid to help keep a nation safe and stable. When you look at things through that lens, sometimes what has been done to suppress the truth, you at least understand the motive. But I think that all of you who are coming here on Wednesday nights, in increasing numbers, that you feel like I do, it is so long past time for this nation and the whole world to move on to the square where everything is the truth again. We have a huge reset to do on the truth of our history, our origin, and what is in this universe. It keeps me getting up every morning and trying to understand more every day and report and Earthfiles and hear, and I'm glad that so many of you are now coming. Thank you. Ian.
Okay, I've got a comment here from a PhD scientist. I'm going to read it out to you. Linda, over the year, been learning about bismuth, magnesium, and ET technology. He shortens it to BIMGZM.
It's bismuth, magnesium, zinc.
Yes, zinc. How can we discuss the new quantum vacuum theory, which explains point-to-point technology? You inspired this work.
Well, thank you. I would so love if I could put a tube from my brain to a really advanced physicist and get a huge download and understand everything. So my journalists and master's degree in communication focused on medicine and science, it allows me to read and do interviews, but it doesn't mean that I fully understand the hard physics and certainly not the equations. But the general sense that I have is that the other intelligences fully understand gravity. They understand how to manipulate gravity. And that in this planet, in the world that we live in, the manipulation of gravity is not something that it's not out in the general world, but it is clear that when you're dealing with UFOs, people in the abduction syndrome, animal mutilations, a whole lot of things where there are beams, and there's so many of these that it might as well be accepted as fact. Otherwise, all of humanity, their ability to report just what they're seeing would be questioned. You assume that all these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of reports are from the same technology and phenomena, and that is the beam. The beam has been reported since more than 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. A beam that can interact with matter, whether it is stone, whether it is a cow, whether it is a human. and that what those beams do appears to lift animals, lift people, lift stones, and it's been described to me by a physicist as the non-humans that we deal with that neutralizing gravity and then being able to control it really finely with small technologies that are handheld is one of the keys. And it reminds me very much of a very important case that happened in Colorado when I was still there and working at the CBS station and doing news and television documentaries. There was the director of the University of Wyoming Counseling and Testing Office, Leo Sprinkle. He was wonderful. And Leo Sprinkle worked with me on a strange harvest. He had ranchers and other people who had seen beams come down into pastures, that they had had missing time. And that was how Dr. Sprinkle started working with me directly and introducing me to some of the people that he worked with. And one of them, it was known as the Clearview case. It was actually published in a limited for a few people, the Clearview case. And it was between Colorado Springs and the Black Forest area, for those of you who know. And it was a large farm. They raised some cattle and other things, and it's very complex. But Dr. Sprinkle and a man named Walter Durr from the Colorado School of Mines, those two came to this farm, did all kinds of night watches and tests and various things, and wrote up this report. And one of the parts that seemed so science fiction, but Dr. Sprinkle is just as honest as the day is long, and it was a report with another scientist. He said the owner of the farm, the father, husband, was very frustrated, asked one of his sons on one night where they had had a Sasquatch, that's what they called him. The family saw the Sasquatch walk across the front yard of their farmhouse from left to right at least a good 50 feet, and they saw it from the living room. They watched it walk. And it's interesting that people will first they will be afraid of things, and then they start getting frustrated, and then anger kicks in. And when anger kicks in, people start to think more clearly. And the father with the son, they took rifles and binoculars and a bunch of stuff, and the father said, I'm going to confront this. And they went to a very specific part of the farm where, as I recall, there were some trees, and they decided that whatever the Sasquatch was going, and these beings that silver craft would rise, and they saw the beams, and they had animal mutilations, they had electricity going on and off in the house, they had all kinds of phenomena. And they get down to this area on their farm, and there they see there is a silver disc, not a huge one, smaller craft. And the father is in a mood that he is just going to charge ahead and demand, who are you, and why are you here, and what are you doing? And he and his son got to a place where they felt like they were still protected by trees. But you and I and everybody today know that you can't sneak up on the non-humans. Whether they're Greys, whether they're reptilians, whether they're Nordics, they know what's going on, a wide range, like having mental radar. And the next thing the father said, he was thinking in his head, I'm going to charge ahead. And he sees the Sasquatch The Sasquatch is moving as if in relationship to a tall blonde. So that was a tall blonde. There was a little being, probably a gray android. And the Sasquatch ends up here, and the blonde is here with a little thing here. The father and son, the father is quite a ways away, but clear sight. And he sees the tall blonde. The part I don't remember is did it just manifest in his hands, or did the blonde reach down and pick it up? That part I don't quite remember, but I know that the father was very surprised that in the tall blonde's hands, suddenly he saw a black box. And the black box had at least one red glowing light on it. And the father said that he watched this blonde push something on the black box, and the Sasquatch fell to the ground. And the father, at that point, with the son, became very afraid. That's what he said. And told his son, we're going back home. So we don't have any further movie frame beyond that. Interestingly, throughout the last 42 years of various places that I have been, where there might have been a face-to-face Sasquatch, either a sight or an encounter by accident or other, one or two other times, people have described seeing a black box in a Sasquatch hand. I do not know what it means, but I know that when Lynn Buchanan did the remote viewing on Bentwaters and Rendlesham Forest in England, and he does his controlled remote viewing and he gets inside of that black glassy triangle that suddenly popped into the forest where John Burroughs and Jim Penniston were. And Lynn Buchanan, in his remote viewing for the CIA of this scene, he gets inside of the black craft. And then the way controlled remote viewing, he is saying he's being drawn, his attention is being drawn to a black box, approximately 9 or 10 inches wide and high. Now, in that remote viewing, puzzling to Lynn, to me, and to everybody, but I really, really have deep respect for Lynn Buchanan's remote viewing. As the remote viewer tries to understand what it is that he's seeing, he got information that there was genetic material inside of that black box, and that the genetic material destiny was to be placed somewhere around our planet or in a very specific place where that was. So the complexity of connections, of technology, various beings, and knowing that we are dealing with very, very advanced technologies. We humans, it isn't intuitive. What people see with ETs and what they do, it is not intuitively understood. Okay, Ian, I guess I didn't realize I'm at the end of the hour. So since I started to say, if there's one more question, I'll try to do it shortly.
Okay, well, thank you for making mention as well about the cryptids too. There's definitely some sort of ET and Sasquatch relation going on there. Okay, just looking down the questions, and we've still got lots of questions. It's a job to choose one that's going to help us. But here's one we can perhaps deal with quite quickly. Someone wants to know about the wild animals that are also mutilated or just domesticated animals. But there's a specific question
Oh,
that
I
someone
can
else
answer
was
that.
asking. Have we ever had any reports of pigs or hogs or
Oh, yes.
wild hogs in Texas
Yes.
being mutilated?
Here is a good, concise answer. Every domestic animal that you can think of, every domestic animal that is raised on farms, or cats, or dogs, or foxes, even snakes, reindeer, badgers, marmots, whole range. I have seen in the U.S. Department of Forestry in Denver 8x10 glossy photographs of deer mutilated, not a drop of blood, the same exact excisions in the classic animals of cattle and horses. A lot of people think it's just cattle and horses. No, it's wild animals. It's every domestic, and that includes pigs and ducks and chickens and horses and goats and sheep and on and on. So I'll leave you tonight with a question that I constantly wonder about. When it's the big animal mutilation question, it's very clear to me that some of it is for sustenance. And all the cases where people have drawn the beings that they were interacting with in juxtaposed with an animal mutilation. The animal's gone up in the beam, the humans are taken up in the beam to see. There's a case or two like that in my Earthfiles with excellent drawings. In those cases, the non-humans are always reptilian. Then there are the other issues that may or may not even tie into the black box, but it's sort of in that same category. That in mutilations and the taking of ovaries, the taking of sexual organs, the taking of sperm and eggs in a lot of abductions. Abductees get the impression that there is some sort of urgency about a genetic program that has something to do with the evolution and experimentation of Earth being used as a laboratory to mix and match genes by a number of civilizations that come from someplace else, who use this beautiful watery planet as a laboratory. And I think that as just a big box, I think sustenance and genetic testing and manipulation, that those are the two big reasons for the mutilations and at least some of the abductions. And if any of you watching tonight, you have any firsthand information about that question, any other questions, please keep coming. And hopefully next week we will jump another number in our subscribers. Hit that red subscriber button down in the lower right if you haven't subscribed, because we are headed toward the summer solstice in June, and I really would like to get to 175,000 subscribers. It doesn't cost you anything, but there is this momentum, this feeling that we keep growing. Well, let's really make it grow, because then we're riding on a wave, and who knows what's going to open up in June or the rest of this year. But you and I, we're bonded about wanting to know the whole truth. And on that note, I love you guys. See you next week.
Turn on closed captions for YouTube videos by clicking the white CC button on the lower right. The default language for Linda's videos is English. If you would like to see the captions in another language, click on the white Settings button next to the CC button. Select Subtitles CC,
I say, you want to get a comb?
and then select Auto Translate.
And I don't have to put them
Select a
any place
language,
or, bind them anywhere. They love
and the
to
captions
have
will now
their
appear
hair
in that language.
sort of gone through, and they will hold their heads. I never had a cat do that before. And they'll pull against the comb, helping me get out snarls. And I think it's the best they've ever been.